Incompetent, are we? The guy roared, steak juice flying. Chloe's world shrunk to the size of his ugly, entitled face. Another complaint, another ripple in the stagnant pond that was her life. But here's the thing. She swallowed the bile, didn't flinch. What he didn't see, couldn't possibly imagine, was her brother's bills, a stack so high they scraped the sky. He just saw a waitress, assumed weakness. He has no idea that her quiet kindness will change everything. See, compassion hides in the oddest places. It's about to bite him and her hard. He wasn't just watching, he was judging. And his judgment was about to shatter her world, not with cruelty, but with a single impossible question that would force her to confront everything she thought she knew about kindness, destiny, and the true price of a second chance. This isn't a fairy tale. It's what happens when desperation meets an extraordinary secret. The Starlight Diner wasn't celestial. It was a greasy spoon off the I-95 corridor, a place where the formica tables were perpetually sticky and the scent of fried onions clung to the air like a ghost. For Chloe Bennett, it was both her prison and her sanctuary. At 24, her dreams of graphic design, of creating beauty with color and form, were as faded as the red vinyl on the booth seats. They had been replaced by the stark reality of rent-overdue utility bills and the crushing weight of her younger brother Leo's medical expenses. Leo was her world. At 16, he should have been worried about high school exams and first dates. Instead, his life was a cycle of doctor's appointments, blood tests, and treatments for a rare autoimmune disorder that baffled most specialists and terrified Chloe. The experimental therapies that gave him a fighting chance weren't covered by any basic insurance plan. So Chloe worked. She worked doubles. She picked up holiday shifts she covered for hungover colleagues. The ache in her feet was a constant companion, a dull throb that mirrored the ache in her heart. Tonight was a particularly brutal Tuesday. Rain lashed against the diner's large plate glass windows, and the place was filled with grumpy travelers and weary truckers. Her manager, a perpetually sour man named Mr. Peterson, had been riding her all evening. "Bennett, table 4 needs a top-up." "Bennett, that order's been sitting under the heat lamp for 2 minutes." "Bennett, smile. You look like you're at a funeral." I might as well be, she thought, forcing her lips into a semblance of a smile as she approached a family of 4. She moved through the chaos with a practiced, almost robotic grace, refilling coffee here, taking an order there, wiping up a spilled milkshake. But beneath the automaton-like efficiency, Chloe was keenly aware of the world around her. She noticed the elderly woman in booth, too carefully folding her napkin, likely lonely. She saw the young couple in the back arguing in hushed, angry tones, and she noticed the man in the corner booth. He'd been there for nearly 2 hours nursing a single cup of black coffee. He wasn't like the usual clientele. He wore a simple dark gray Henley and jeans, but they were well-fitted and made of a quality fabric that seemed out of place amidst the polyester and worn denim of the other patrons. He wasn't reading a paper or scrolling on his phone. He was just watching. His gaze wasn't predatory or intrusive. It was quiet, observant, and deeply analytical. He had intense dark eyes that seemed to absorb the entire room without moving. Chloe guessed he was in his late 30s with a subtle webbing of lines around his eyes that spoke of stress, not age. There was a stillness about him that was unnerving. Around 9:00 p.m., the bell above the door chimed violently, admitting a blast of wind and a man who seemed to carry his own personal storm cloud. He was loud-dressed in an expensive but tasteless suit and wire of cologne and entitlement. He snapped his fingers to get Chloe's attention, a gesture that made her skin crawl. "Hey, sweetheart, steak medium rare, and a beer, make it quick." He didn't look at her, instead tapping impatiently on his phone. Chloe scribbled it down. "What kind of beer would you?" "Whatever's domestic and cold." "Don't make me think." She retreated to the kitchen, her jaw tight. She delivered the beer and put in the order. 20 minutes later, she placed the steak in front of him. He cut into it immediately, chewed once, and threw his fork down with a clatter that silenced half the diner. "What is this garbage?" he boomed. "I said medium rare. This is shoe leather. Are you deaf or just incompetent?" Chloe's breath hitched. Mr. Peterson's head snapped up from his office. All eyes were on her. The old Chloe, the one before Leo got sick, might have fired back a sharp retort. The current Chloe, the one whose job was the only thing keeping her brother on his treatment plan, swallowed her pride. "I'm very sorry, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'll have the kitchen make you another one right away." "Don't bother," he sneered, pushing the plate away. "I've lost my appetite. I'm not paying for this slop." "Sir, you've eaten a quarter of it," she pointed out softly. "Are you arguing with me?" His voice rose in volume and pitch. "You want me to tell your manager what a useless waitress you are?" "I'm not paying. Get me the check for the beer." Mr. Peterson was already scurrying over his face, a mask of panicked apology. "Sir, my apologies. Of course, the steak is on the house. Is there anything else we can get you?" He shot a venomous glare at Chloe. "I'll be speaking with you later, Bennett." Chloe felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. She mumbled an apology and walked away, her eyes stinging. She busied herself wiping down a counter, her back to the room, trying to compose herself. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of them. After the man paid for his beer and left, Chloe began clearing his table, her movements stiff. As she picked up the plate, she saw something tucked beneath it, a $20 bill. It was more than enough to cover the steak he'd refused to pay for. She looked around, but the man was gone. It must have been an accident. She took it straight to Mr. Peterson. "Sir, the man at table 7 who left this, it covers the steak." Peterson snatched the bill from her hand. "Good means I don't have to dock it from your pay," he grumbled, stuffing it into the register without another word. Defeated, Chloe went about her duties. The night wore on. Finally, the diner began to empty. The only one left was the quiet man in the corner. She approached his table, coffee pot in hand. "More coffee, sir." He looked up, and for the first time his gaze focused solely on her. His eyes were a startling shade of green, like moss after a rain. "No, thank you. Just the check, please." His voice was calm and deep, a stark contrast to the grating belligerence of the steak man. She fetched the small slip of paper. 2 She placed it on his table. He laid a credit card on the tray. It was a simple black metallic card with no gaudy design. The name on it read, Ken Unell. She ran the card and brought back the slip for him to sign. He scrolled a signature, added a tip, and folded the receipt over before placing it back on the tray. "Have a good night," he said, his eyes meeting hers again. There was an unreadable expression in them, something like empathy or maybe respect. "You too, sir," she replied automatically. He stood, revealing he was taller than she'd thought, maybe 6'2" with a lean, athletic build. He gave a slight nod and walked out into the rainy night, leaving the diner in an unnerving silence. Chloe picked up the tray. Her mind was already calculating. A 20% tip on $2.50 would be $50. Maybe he'd be generous and leave $1. She needed every penny. She flipped over the receipt, her breath caught in her throat. She stared, certain her exhausted eyes were deceiving her. She picked it up, her fingers trembling. The bill was $250. On the tip line he had written clear as day, 5,000 Wes. Below the tip in the same neat, strong handwriting was a short message. Character is a currency that isn't accepted everywhere. Where it matters, it's priceless. Your patience tonight was worth more than this. Below that, a phone number and another line. If you believe you're worth more than this diner, call me. We have something to discuss. Chloe sank into the booth, the receipt clutched in her hand, her heart hammered against her ribs. $5,000. It was more than 2 months' rent. It was a full cycle of Leo's medication. It was a lifeline. But it was the note that truly staggered her. He had seen it all. He had seen her humiliation, her restraint, her quiet dignity, and he had put a price on it that was beyond comprehension. The world, which had felt so small and gray just minutes before, suddenly felt vast and terrifying and full of impossible light. The Starlight Diner closed at midnight. Chloe spent the last hour in a daze mechanically wiping down tables and restocking salt shakers. Mr. Peterson mollified by not having to comp. The steak granted a good night and left her to lock up. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, she pulled the receipt out of her apron pocket. 5,000. Go, lass. The number still didn't feel real. It was a typo. It had to be. No one tips $5,000 on a cup of coffee. He must have meant to write fatal and his pen slipped, but the decimal point was precise. The zeros were perfectly formed. And then there was the note. She sank onto a stool, the smell of bleach and old grease filling her senses, a stark contrast to the surreal piece of paper in her hand. The money was one thing, a shocking, life-altering thing, but the message felt heavier, more significant. Your patience tonight was worth more than this. Someone had witnessed her lowest moment of the day, the peak of her humiliation, and seen value, not pity. Value. Her first instinct was a tidal wave of suspicion. This was a joke, a cruel, elaborate prank, or worse, it was some kind of scam. The phone number was probably a premium rate line that would charge her a fortune. The credit card would bounce in the morning, and Mr. Peterson would take the $5,000 out of her wages for the rest of her life. She pictured herself 30 years old, still working at the Starlight, paying off the phantom tip. But the card had felt heavy, real. Con O'Connell. The name was unfamiliar, but it sounded substantial. She pulled out her own cracked smartphone and with trembling fingers typed the name into the search bar. The results hit her like a physical blow. The first few links were to business journals. Forbes, the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg. The headlines were dizzying. Kean O'Connell, the reclusive tech maverick behind O'Connell Industries. O'Connell's Ethel Red AI, poised to revolutionize logistics from orphan to Oracle. The unlikely rise of Con Unal. Photographs showed the same man from the diner, though usually in impeccably tailored suits instead of a Henley. The same intense green eyes, the same quiet assessing expression. He was the founder and CEO of O'Connell Industries, a multi-billion-dollar technology and investment firm. He was notoriously private, rarely giving interviews or appearing at public events. One article described him as a ghost in the machine of modern capitalism, a brilliant mind who valued anonymity above all else. Another detailed his tragic backstory. His parents, Irish immigrants, had died in a car accident when he was a teenager, leaving him to be raised in the foster care system. He had built his empire from nothing. Chloe felt the air leave her lungs. The man who had sat in her section for 2 hours, watching the dregs of society drift in and out, was one of the wealthiest men in the country. He had seen her get verbally assaulted over a $10 steak. She slumped against the counter, her head spinning. Why? Why would a man like that be in the Starlight Diner? Why would he care about a waitress? And why would he leave a tip that was to her a fortune, but to him probably less than a rounding error? The phone number on the receipt now seemed like the most intimidating thing she had ever seen. What could he possibly want to discuss? Her mind raced through a dozen scenarios, each more outlandish than the last. Was this some bizarre recruitment test for a TV show? Was he a philanthropist looking for a sob story to feature in a campaign? Or was it something darker, something transactional? She couldn't even bear to imagine. She walked home in the rain, the thin fabric of her jacket doing little to keep out the chill. The receipt was tucked safely in her wallet, feeling like a hot coal against her hip. Her apartment building smelled of damp carpet and boiled cabbage. Inside her small, cluttered living room, she checked on Leo. He was asleep, his breathing shallow. But even the latest round of medication sat on his bedside table, a vial of liquid gold that cost more per ounce than any perfume. Looking at him, the fear began to recede, replaced by a fierce, desperate resolve. The $5,000, if it was real, was a godsend. It would cover next month's treatment completely. It would mean she wouldn't have to choose between keeping the lights on and buying the medicine that kept her brother alive. The risk of calling the number, whatever it was, suddenly seemed very small compared to the risk of not calling. The next morning, her bank app confirmed it. The credit card transaction had cleared. The diner's account was $5,002 besides $50 richer. Mr. Peterson, seeing the deposit, was in a state of flustered disbelief. He assumed it was a corporate expense account error and said nothing to Chloe, terrified that acknowledging it would make it disappear. For Chloe, the reality of the money was a dizzying relief. She could breathe, but the number remained. All day during another grueling shift, it preyed on her mind. If you believe you're worth more than this diner, call me. Did she? Before Leo's illness, she had been a promising student at the community college, her graphic design portfolio brimming with talent and passion. She had believed in her future, but years of exhaustion and worry had eroded that belief, grinding it down to mere survival. Did she still believe she was worth more? Yes. The answer came from a deep, almost forgotten part of herself. Yes, she did. That evening, after making sure Leo had eaten and taken his medication, she sat on her lumpy sofa, the piece of paper in her hand. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She took a deep breath and dialed the number. It rang twice. A crisp professional voice answered, "Not Keon O'Connell's O'Connell. How may I direct your call?" It was a woman's voice, cool and efficient. Chloe's mouth went dry. Hello. My name is Chloe Bennett. I was given this number by Mr. O'Connell." It came out as a question. There was a brief pause. Chloe could hear the faint, almost imperceptible click of a keyboard. "One moment, Miss Bennett." She was put on hold. The music wasn't the usual tiny elevator tune. It was a complex, beautiful piece of classical piano. It only made her feel more out of place. After what felt like an eternity, the woman's voice returned. "Mr. O'Connell can see you tomorrow morning at 10 Anturi. The address is Warren Westbridge Avenue, Penthouse Suite. Please bring a form of identification. A car will be waiting for you at your address at 9:15. Does that work for you, Miss Bennett?" Chloe blinked. A car? A penthouse suite? This was happening. "Yes," she squeaked, her voice, barely a whisper. "Yes, that works. Very good. We will see you then." The line went dead. Chloe stared at her phone. 1400 Westbridge Avenue was the O'Connell Tower, a gleaming spire of black glass and steel that dominated the city skyline. It was a monument to a world she had only ever seen from the outside, a world of power, of wealth, of influence. Tomorrow she was going to walk into the heart of it. The fear was immense, a cold dread that settled deep in her bones. But beneath the fear, a tiny, fragile spark of something else ignited. Hope. The next morning, Chloe woke up before her alarm. She spent an hour agonizing over what to wear. Everything she owned seemed to scream, struggling waitress. Her jeans were faded. Her blouses were from thrift stores. Her one good dress was for weddings and funerals. She finally settled on a pair of simple black trousers, a plain white blouse that was thankfully not see-through, and a gray cardigan to hide the frayed cuffs. She pulled her hair back into a sleek, low ponytail, trying to look professional and invisible at the same time. At exactly 9:15 a.m., a silent black sedan pulled up in front of her rundown apartment building. The car was so clean and polished it seemed to repel the grime of the neighborhood. A driver in a crisp suit got out and opened the back door for her. "Bennett?" "Yes," she mumbled, sliding onto the plush leather seat. The interior of the car smelled of wealth, a subtle clean scent that was the polar opposite of her daily life. The drive was silent and smooth. As they drew closer to the city center, the O'Connell Tower loomed larger, a shard of obsidian piercing the sky. Chloe felt like a peasant being summoned to the king's castle. They bypassed the main entrance, pulling into a private underground garage. The driver escorted her to a private elevator. He used a key card and the elevator shot upwards with a silent, gut-wrenching velocity. There were no buttons for other floors. It was a direct flight to the top. The doors opened not into a lobby, but directly into the penthouse suite. And it wasn't an office. It was a sprawling, minimalist space that seemed to be floating in the clouds. The walls were almost entirely glass, offering a staggering 360-degree view of the city below. Chloe could see the highway, a ribbon of concrete where the Starlight Diner sat like a forgotten toy. The furniture was sparse and elegant, low-slung sofas, a single abstract sculpture, and shelves filled with books, not awards. The air was cool and still. A woman with a severe haircut and an impeccably tailored suit approached her. She was the one from the phone. "Ms. Bennett, I'm Genevieve Ashford, Mr. O'Connell's Chief Operating Officer. He will be with you shortly. Can I get you some water, coffee?" Her tone was polite, but her eyes were cold and appraising, sweeping over Chloe's outfit in a way that made her feel like a specimen under a microscope. "Water would be fine, thank you," Chloe said, her voice small. Genevieve Ashford nodded curtly and retreated. Chloe stood awkwardly in the center of the vast room, terrified to touch anything. This single room was larger than her entire apartment. The view was a panorama of power, and from this height all the struggles and noise of the street below were rendered insignificant and silent. It was the world as seen by a god, not a man. "It's a bit much, isn't it?" The voice came from her right. Keen O'Connell emerged from a doorway she hadn't noticed, which presumably led to the actual offices. He was dressed in a simple dark gray suit that fit him perfectly. He looked more powerful here, more at home, but his eyes held the same quiet intensity. She remembered the view. "I mean," he clarified, walking towards her, "sometimes I think it's a dangerous thing. Puts too much distance between you and the world." He gestured for her to sit on one of the sofas. She perched on the edge, her back ramrod straight. He sat opposite her, not behind a desk, but in a matching armchair, creating an atmosphere that was more conversation than interrogation. "Ms. Bennett Chloe, thank you for coming," he began. "I imagine you have a lot of questions." "A few," she understated, her hands clenched in her lap. The tip? I don't understand." "It wasn't a tip," he said simply. "It was a down payment, an investment. I spent 2 hours in that diner. I do it once a year on the anniversary of my parents' first date. They met there. It's a way to stay connected to where I started. Most of the time, it's a depressing experience. I watch people treat the staff like they're invisible, like they're not human. I watch the staff become hardened and cynical in response. It's an ecosystem of casual cruelty." He leaned forward slightly, his green eyes fixed on her. "But I didn't see that in you. I saw the rudest customer I've witnessed in years treat you like dirt. I saw your manager throw you under the bus, and you handled it with a quiet, steely dignity that most people in my boardroom lack. You took a moment, you composed yourself, and you got back to work. You didn't let his ugliness become your own. That's rare. It's a strength." Chloe was speechless. He was dissecting her character with the precision of a surgeon. And then he continued, "The homeless man who came in just before I left. Frank, he comes in every Tuesday. Your manager was about to throw him out, but you intervened. You gave him that unclaimed slice of pie and a cup of coffee, and you put it on your own tab. I saw you mark it in your notepad." Chloe's face flushed. She'd completely forgotten about that. It was such an automatic gesture, a small act in a long line of them. She never thought anyone would notice. "So no," Khan said, leaning back. "This isn't about a tip. I don't believe in charity, Chloe. Charity creates dependence. I believe in investment. I invest in businesses, in technology, in ideas. And most importantly, I invest in people. People with integrity, with resilience, with character." He paused, letting the words hang in the air between them. "Your brother's name is Leo. He has a stage 3 variant of Kawasaki disease complicated by macrophage activation syndrome. The current treatment protocol involves high-dose IVG and an experimental TNF inhibitor, which costs roughly $22,000 for a 6-month course, not including consultations and hospital fees." Chloe felt the blood drain from her face. How do you know that I have extensive research resources, Miss Bennett?" he said, his tone matter-of-fact, not threatening. "When I consider an investment, I do my due diligence. Your life is difficult. You dropped out of a graphic design program where you were at the top of your class to care for him. You work 70 hours a week. You have no safety net." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. "So, this is my proposal. It's not a gift, it's an offer. As of this morning, I have paid off Leo's outstanding medical debt and established a fund to cover all his future medical expenses for as long as he needs it. Consider it a signing bonus." Chloe's world tilted on its axis. A sob caught in her throat. All of it. The mountain of debt that haunted her every waking moment was gone. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of shock and overwhelming relief. "But that's not the offer," Khan said, turning back to her. "That just clears the board. I'm starting a new philanthropic branch of my company, the Akinel Foundation. It's not about writing checks. It's about creating tangible on-the-ground support systems for families in crisis, people who fall through the cracks of the system. I need someone to help build it from the ground up. Someone who understands what it's like to be in the cracks. Someone with empathy. I also need someone to create the entire visual identity for the foundation, the logos, the website, the campaign materials. someone with a talent for graphic design. He looked directly at her. "I'm offering you a job, Chloe, Director of Community Outreach and Brand Development for the O'Connell Foundation. The starting salary is $120,000 a year with full benefits. You'll answer directly to me. Your first task will be to use your own story anonymously, of course, to design a program that helps people exactly like you." Chloe stared at him, her mind a maelstrom of confusion, disbelief, and a terrifying, soaring hope. From waitress to director in the span of a conversation, it was impossible. It was a dream. "Why?" she finally whispered, the tears now streaming freely down her cheeks. "Why me? You could hire anyone." Can O'Connell gave a small, sad smile. "Because the best people to solve a problem are the ones who have lived it. I can hire 100 red Ivy League graduates with MBAs. They can create spreadsheets and projections. They can't create genuine connection. They don't know what it feels like to choose between medicine and electricity. You do. Your perspective isn't a liability, Chloe. It's your greatest asset. The question is, are you ready to use it?" From the corner of her eye, Chloe saw Genevieve Ashford standing in the doorway, her expression a mask of stony disapproval. In that moment, Chloe understood this wasn't just a job offer. It was a test, and she was being thrown into the deep end of a world she didn't understand. A world where some, like the woman in the doorway, would be waiting for her to drown. Accepting Kian Unal's offer was the easiest and most terrifying decision of Chloe's life. The words yes tumbled out of her mouth before she could fully process the seismic shift they would cause. One moment she was drowning, the next she was standing on the shore, gasping with no idea how she got there. The first week was a blur of paperwork and bewildering orientations meetings. She was given a spacious, sterile office on the 48th floor, just 2 below Keen's penthouse. Her window offered a view that was only slightly less magnificent than his. She had a state-of-the-art computer with every design program she had ever dreamed of, using a corporate credit card and an assistant, a polite, nervous young man named Peter, who seemed terrified of her. The most profound change, however, was quiet and personal. The first night after her meeting with Keon, she went home and told Leo. She explained as best she could that a wealthy benefactor had noticed her at the diner and offered her a job, and as part of the package, all his medical bills were covered forever. Leo, who had grown so accustomed to the quiet anxiety that permeated their lives, simply stared at her. Then, for the first time in years, he broke down and cried, not tears of pain or fear, but of pure, unadulterated relief. Chloe held him, the two of them weeping together on their lumpy sofa. The crushing weight that had defined their existence, finally blessedly gone. That single moment was worth more than any salary or fancy office. But the relief of her personal life stood in stark contrast to the mounting pressure of her professional one. The O'Connell Tower was a world unto itself, with its own language, its own customs, and its own unforgiving hierarchy. It was a gilded cage, and Chloe felt like a common sparrow trapped inside with a flock of calculating predatory hawks. The undisputed matriarch of the flock was Genevieve Ashford. From day one, Genevieve made her disdain for Chloe clear. It wasn't overt aggression, but 1,000 subtle cuts. She would forget to include Chloe in crucial email chains. She would schedule vital meetings and accidentally send the invitation to Chloe's old defunct email address from HR. In group settings, she would introduce Chloe with a slight, almost imperceptible emphasis. "And this is Chloe Bennett, who is heading up our new foundation. Khan has a personal interest in this project." The implication was clear and venomous. Chloe was a pet project, a charity case, not a colleague. Chloe tried to ignore it, focusing instead on her work. She threw herself into designing the foundation's visual identity. The ideas that had been dormant for so long came flooding back. She sketched logos, designed website mock-ups, and created branding guides. The work was exhilarating. When she was lost in a color palette or a typography choice, she could almost forget the cold stares and whispered conversations that followed her down the hallway. Her first major assignment was to develop and present a proposal for the foundation's inaugural project. Drawing on her own experience, she designed the Bridge program, a system to provide immediate, no questions asked, financial relief to families who hit a sudden medical or housing crisis, buying them the crucial 30 to 60 days they needed to find a more permanent solution. It was about filling the gap, the terrifying chasm between a paycheck and a catastrophe. She worked tirelessly on the presentation, creating compelling infographics and a detailed, compassionate plan. The presentation was to be made to the company's executive board, a panel of 6 sharp, suited, stern-faced individuals, including Genevieve and Con. Chloe felt sick with nerves as she stood at the front of the boardroom. The room was intimidating, all dark wood and polished chrome with a view that could make a person feel dizzy. Con gave her a small, encouraging nod from his seat at the head of the table. Genevieve, seated to his right, looked bored. Chloe began her voice, trembling slightly at first, but gaining strength as she spoke about the people she wanted to help. She talked about the paralyzing fear of an eviction notice, the shame of having a prescription declined at the pharmacy counter. She didn't use her own story, but she poured all of her own emotions into it. When she finished, there was a polite silence, a very passionate presentation. Miss Bennett, one of the board members, a man named Mr. Davies, commented, his tone non-committal. Then Genevieve spoke, her voice smooth as glass indeed. Passionate. However, I see a few practical and frankly alarming oversights. She picked up the proposal Chloe had distributed. Your projected budget for this bridge program is ambitious to say the least, but more importantly, your vetting process for applicants seems dangerously lax. Minimal paperwork, you say. Emphasis on speed. That sounds like a recipe for fraud. How do we ensure we're not just handing out money to grifters and sob stories? Chloe was prepared for this. The goal is to eliminate the bureaucratic barriers that often prevent the most desperate from getting help. We'd have a small team of caseworkers to do rapid personal follow-ups. The initial grant is small enough to be a low risk for the foundation, but large enough to be life-changing for the recipient. It's about trusting people first. Genevieve gave a small, condescending laugh. Trust, a lovely sentiment, but a disastrous business model. We are a corporation, Ms. Bennett, not a soup kitchen. Every dollar must be accountable. Your proposal lacks metrics for success, key performance indicators, and a scalable framework for fraud prevention. It's emotionally driven, not data-driven. She had reframed Chloe's strength, her empathy, as a fatal weakness. The other board members began to murmur in agreement, their faces hardening. Chloe felt her confidence crumble. Genevieve was speaking their language, the cold, hard language of profit and loss, of risk mitigation and scalability. Chloe's compassionate plan suddenly sounded naive and childish. She fumbled for a response, but the corporate jargon Genevieve had deployed was like a wall she couldn't climb. She glanced at Keon, hoping for support, but he remained silent, his expression unreadable, watching her, letting her handle it. It was a test, and she was failing spectacularly. The meeting ended with the board table abling her proposal for further review, a polite term for killing it. Chloe walked back to her office, her face burning with humiliation. She felt like an imposter who had finally been exposed. Genevieve had been right all along. She didn't belong here. The final, most cruel cut came 2 days later. Peter, her assistant, knocked on her door, looking deeply uncomfortable. Miss Bennett, I thought you should see this. He handed her a print out of an internal memo drafted by Genevieve. It was a proposal for the foundation's first major fundraising event, a lavish high society gala. The theme was a gilded evening of giving, and it targeted the city's wealthiest donors. The memo went on to propose an adopt-a-family program where donors could be matched with a vetted, deserving, needy family, complete with a glossy brochure of their story. It was a perversion of everything Chloe had intended. It turned charity into a spectator sport for the rich, turning families' private tragedies into sentimental commodities to be purchased. It was everything she had fought against. And at the bottom of the memo, in the section for Project Lead, was her name. Genevieve had not only rejected her idea, but had twisted it into this grotesque parody and assigned her to execute it. It was a checkmate. If she refused, she would look uncooperative and incapable. If she accepted, she would be forced to betray her own core principles. Chloe stared at the memo, the words blurring through a fresh wave of tears. She had been so wrong. Keen O'Connell hadn't saved her. He had simply moved her from one cage to another, this one just more luxurious and with a far more cunning serpent inside. She picked up her bag, leaving the memo on the desk. She walked past her bewildered assistant, got in the elevator, and rode it down to the ground floor, not knowing if she would ever come back. Chloe didn't go home. The thought of facing Leo's hopeful face was more than she could bear. Instead, she walked. She walked for hours, letting the city's anonymous crowds swallow her up. The towering buildings that had once seemed to promise a new future now felt oppressive, their glass and steel facades reflecting her own failure back at her. She found herself almost unconsciously in her old neighborhood. The familiar sights and sounds, the rumble of the elevated train, the smell of street vendor hot dogs, the chatter of people on their stoops were a painful reminder of the life she thought she had escaped. It was a hard life, but it was honest. There were no hidden agendas, no corporate sabotage. Cruelty like that of the man in the diner was at least direct. This new world with its smiling assassins and polite poison was infinitely more treacherous. She ended up on a bench in a small, scruffy park, watching children play on a rusty swing set. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was Con. She ignored it. It buzzed again and again. On the fifth call, she finally answered, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "What? Where are you?" His voice wasn't angry, just calm and direct. "Does it matter? I'm quitting. You can tell Genevieve she won. I'm not cut out for your world." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Stay where you are. I'm coming to find you." Before she could protest, he hung up. A part of her wanted to run, to disappear completely, but exhaustion, both physical and emotional, kept her rooted to the bench. 20 minutes later, the same black sedan she had first ridden in pulled up beside the park. Khan got out of the back seat. He wasn't wearing a suit, but jeans and a dark pullover, looking more like the man from the diner than the billionaire CEO. He walked over and sat on the other end of the bench, leaving a respectful distance between them. He didn't speak for a long time, just sat with her, watching the kids play. The silence was more comforting than any platitude would have been. "I know about Genevieve's memo," he finally said, his voice quiet. "I know what she did in the boardroom. I let it happen." Chloe flinched as if struck. "You let it happen? Why was it all just some sick game to see if the charity case could swim with the sharks?" "No," he said, turning to look at her. His face was serious. All traces of corporate polish gone. It was a test, but not just for you, for the board, for the system I've built. I wanted to see if they could recognize genuine value over polished presentation. They failed, and I needed you to see the battle you were truly signing up for. It's not just about helping people, Chloe. It's about fighting the apathy and cynicism of the very systems that are supposed to help. "I can't fight that," she whispered, shaking her head. "I don't know how. I don't belong in that boardroom. I don't speak that language." "You don't have to," he insisted. "You just have to speak your own. But you're right. I haven't been entirely honest with you. I asked too much of you without giving you the whole truth." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "The reason I was at that diner, it's true my parents met there, but there's more to it. And the reason I chose you, it wasn't random. It wasn't just your character." In that moment, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, he extracted a folded yellowed piece of newspaper, carefully laminated. He handed it to her. The headline read, "Off-Duty Paramedic, a Hero in Highway Pileup." The date was 16 years ago. The article described a multi-car crash on the I-95. An off-duty paramedic on his way home had been the first on the scene. He had pulled a woman from a burning car just seconds before it was engulfed in flames, saving her life. The article named the hero paramedic. His name was Daniel Bennett. Chloe stared at the name, her father's name. He was a paramedic. He had died when she was 8 months after this article was published. A sudden, massive heart attack in his sleep. Her memories of him were fragmented, blurry images of a kind man with a warm smile who was always tired. "The woman he saved," Khan said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "That was my mother." Chloe looked up from the clipping, her heart stopping. She stared into Kian Unal's green eyes, and for the first time, she saw not a billionaire or a CEO, but the boy who almost lost his mother in a fire. "He saved her life," Kian continued. My father was in the car behind her, trapped. He saw the whole thing. He said, "Your father was fearless. After the ambulance took my mom to the hospital, your father just faded back into the crowd. My dad tried to find him to thank him, but he couldn't get his name at the scene. By the time we tracked him down through the paramedic service a few weeks later, we learned he had passed away. We never got to thank him. We never got to repay the debt." He looked away towards the skyline that bore his name. "My parents died 2 years later in another crash. I went into the foster system. I never forgot the name, though. Daniel Bennett. For years, I've had my people searching, trying to find his family to see if they needed anything. The search was difficult. You and your mother moved after he died, and your mother remarried and changed her name. It was only recently through a deep dive, the public record search, that we found a match. A Chloe Bennett, daughter of the late Daniel Bennett, living in the same city, whose younger brother had a catastrophic medical diagnosis." He turned back to her, his eyes pleading for understanding. "When I saw your name, I had to see for myself. I came to the diner to watch you. I thought I would just anonymously pay off your debts and disappear. But then I saw you. I saw him in you. That same quiet strength, that same instinct to help without seeking reward. That dignity. It wasn't charity, Chloe. It was never charity. It's a debt of honor my family has owed yours for 16 years. The world had shifted beneath Chloe's feet once again. The story of her life, a narrative of struggle and bad luck, was suddenly part of a much larger, more intricate tapestry of fate and connection. Her father, a hazy figure from her childhood, was suddenly a hero, his legacy echoing through time to save his children. Keon's unbelievable offer wasn't the whim of a rich man. It was the closing of a circle, the fulfillment of a promise. She wasn't an imposter. She wasn't a pet project. She was her father's daughter. And the strength he had passed down to her was not a liability, but a legacy. The tears that came this time were not of sadness or humiliation, but of a profound, earth-shattering understanding. The fight with Genevieve, with the board, with the whole cynical world, it was no longer just her fight. It was her father's too, and she would not let him down. Chloe returned to the O'Connell Tower the next morning, but she was not the same woman who had fled the day before. The knowledge of her father's legacy had forged a new spine of steel within her. She walked past her office and directly into a high-level planning meeting for the fundraising gala, a meeting she hadn't been invited to. Genevieve Ashford stopped mid-sentence as Chloe entered. "I believe you're in the wrong room," she said icily. "No, I'm exactly where I need to be," Chloe replied, her voice ringing with newfound authority. She turned to the assembled team. "The Gilded Evening concept is canceled. It's exploitative and misses the entire point of the foundation. We're not selling pity, we're building bridges." Before Genevieve could protest, Chloe laid out her new vision. The event would be called the Bridge Builders Initiative. Instead of a lavish party, it would be an immersive showcase. She described creating powerful installations, each detailing a real solvable problem. A family needing a car repair, a student needing a laptop. Guests wouldn't just donate, they would use tablets to directly fund a specific need in what she called the market of moments. Genevieve was apoplectic, calling the idea grim, uncomfortable, and doomed to fail. "You can't ask millionaires to feel bad," she argued to Khan. "It's fundraising 101. Khan simply looked at Chloe, saw the fire in her eyes, and overruled Genevieve. "Let her work," he commanded. It was a colossal gamble, and Chloe's future rested on the outcome. The night of the event, the atmosphere was tense. Wealthy donors arrived in bespoke suits and couture gowns, looking confused by the raw industrial space and the stark museum-like exhibits. For a moment, Chloe's stomach churned as they milled about awkwardly. Genevieve stood in a corner, a smug "I told you so" look on her face. Then the first domino fell. An elderly woman draped in diamonds stood before an installation about a veteran who couldn't afford a prosthetic limb. After listening to his story, she quietly tapped her tablet. A large screen on the wall, previously dark, lit up. A hero's mobility funded. A gasp went through the room. A tech mogul then funded a year's worth of specialized baby formula for a low-income family. Another screen lit up. Soon it became a cascade. The quiet competition wasn't about ego, but about impact. The room transformed from a party into a mission control center for kindness. The night was capped by a raw, heartfelt speech from a local food bank director whose honest words cut through any remaining pretense. By the end of the evening, they hadn't just met their fundraising goal, they had tripled it. More importantly, real connections were made between the city's elite and its frontline community leaders. The next morning, Genevieve Ashford's resignation was on Can's desk. As Chloe looked out over the city from her office, Keon came to stand beside her. "You didn't just throw a party." "Chloe," he said, his voice filled with a respect she had never heard before. "You showed them how to be architects of change. Your father saved one life with his hands. You honored him tonight by showing hundreds of people how to save lives with their hearts." 2 years later, Chloe Bennett was no longer an imposter in a gilded cage. She was its architect. As executive director, she had grown the O'Connell Foundation into a formidable force for good, its Bridge Builders Initiative, a celebrated model of effective philanthropy. She moved through the world with a quiet confidence, her past struggles not a source of shame, but the bedrock of her strength. Her brother Leo, now in remission, was in his first year of PMED, his future a bright horizon. Her partnership with Keon was one of deep mutual respect, the debt between their families long repaid and replaced by a shared mission. One rainy Tuesday driving home, an old instinct led her back to the I-95 corridor and the familiar buzzing sign of the Starlight Diner. The place was timeless, steeped in the same scent of fried onions and stale coffee. She took a booth and watched a young waitress, no older than 20, move through the evening rush. In the girl's tired eyes and forced smile, Chloe saw a painful reflection of herself, a ghost from a life that felt a world away. When Chloe paid for her coffee, she left a $500 tip on the small bill. It was enough to be a lifeline, but not so much as to be a fantasy. Beneath the amount, she didn't leave a phone number or a promise of rescue. She simply wrote, "I see how hard you're working. Your strength is worth more than you know. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small." She left without seeing the waitress's reaction. As Chloe drove away, leaving the diner's light behind, she understood the truth of her journey. Can O'Connell hadn't saved her. He had given her a door and the key. It was her own courage that had turned it, her own vision that built the new world on the other side. Her life had been changed forever, not by a billionaire's gift, but by the profound power of being seen and the realization that her true purpose was to hold that door open for others. The story of Chloe Bennett is a powerful reminder that our true worth isn't measured by our job title or our bank account, but by the quiet integrity we show when no one is watching. It's a testament to the idea that a single act of kindness, a moment of recognition, can echo through generations and change the entire course of a life. Chloe wasn't just saved from poverty. She was empowered to become a savior for others, proving that the deepest struggles often forge the strongest leaders. Her journey from a hopeless waitress to a beacon of hope shows us that there are Keon O'Connells in the world. People who see value where others see nothing. But more importantly, it shows us there are countless Chloes filled with untapped potential, waiting for their chance to shine. If this story moved you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share it with someone who might need a reminder that their character matters. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story about the incredible hidden connections that shape our cloud.